In every single cop show or movie you've ever seen involving the police and law enforcement, you have heard this statement, or at least parts of these statements. In fact, you probably know them by heart. But it wasn't always this way. So, why do those in law enforcement read these rights word for word when anybody is ever arrested? Well, here's the story told from the point of view of the arresting officer, Carroll Cooley, about what happened in the state of Arizona in 1966 and why your rights are required to be read to you if you ever happen to be arrested. My name is Carroll Cooley. I'm a retired police captain, and it was 1963. I'd been on the Phoenix Police Department for about 5 years, and I had been a detective for, I guess, about 1. Back then, things were different, not just in Phoenix, but in how all cops did things back then. There weren't any real guidelines about what we now call Miranda rights today. I mean, we didn't have to read anyone a list of rights when they were taken into custody or arrested. It was generally assumed by both of us, both the suspect and the officers, that those rights were given to you in court. I mean, ask anybody in law enforcement in those days. It was just how it was. One spring afternoon, we brought in a man named Ernesto Miranda. He was being questioned about the kidnapping and the assault of an 18-year-old woman. But he was also a robbery suspect involved in 2 different people in the same area. Anyway, we placed him in the lineup, and the victim identified him almost immediately. Afterward, we questioned him in the interview rooms. There were no threats, no intimidation, just your basic interview. After about 2 hours, he confessed. He admitted to committing the crime. He even signed a written confession, and at the bottom, I made sure that it said, "This statement is made voluntarily without threats or promises." Now, when the case went to trial, the confession was obviously a powerful piece of evidence. Ernesto Miranda, he was convicted and he was sentenced. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld the conviction after it was appealed, and so did the 9th District Court of Appeals. It all seemed like any other case I had been involved in, and so I went back to business as usual. But then the case went higher, all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, they took a step-by-step look at what happened in that interrogation room. They weren't focused on whether Miranda did it or not. The evidence said that he had, but what they cared about was how we obtained that confession. The justices ruled that suspects must be informed of their rights before questioning, that they have the right to remain silent, the right to have an attorney present, and that anything that they say can and will be used against them in a court of law. The decision came down in 1966, almost 3 years after the incident, and it's commonly known as Miranda versus the state of Arizona. The conviction was overturned, but the fight for justice for the victim was not. You see, there were a few interesting details that many people who have heard of this case may not be aware of. Now, the state of Arizona, they retried Ernesto Miranda, and he was convicted again, and he remained in prison, and he did so for about 11 years. However, he was released for good behavior. A lot of people don't know that. But in a funny way, when Ernesto got out of jail, he started to autograph some of the cards that were given to the police officers to read to people that were arrested, and he made money doing it. But unfortunately, Ernesto, he never really made any lasting changes in his life, sadly enough. He continued to hang around the rough part of town, dealing with the same rough kind of crowd and shady people. But this story has a twist. As fate would have it, some years later, Ernesto Miranda got in a fight at a local Phoenix bar over what witnesses said was a card game. And Ernesto was stabbed in that bar, and he died on that barroom floor before help could arrive. And as fate and irony would have it, at the scene, Ernesto Miranda's alleged killer, before being questioned, was in fact read his Miranda rights. That's right. The man they were questioning, however, he gave a false name, and so they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. But when police later learned of the killer's real name, they went back to make the arrest, but he was no longer there. And to my knowledge, he has never been found. You know, people look at this case on the surface and they see a guy whose rights were violated. But there are so many more interesting details and facts and accounts that were involved in this incredible story. And I encourage anyone who is seeing this to research it, and you will see that it's not only fascinating, but there's so much more under the surface. You know, looking back, I don't think that any of us realized how big this case would become. I was just doing my job as a detective, following the procedures we had been doing the whole time. But that Supreme Court decision changed the way that we do things in this country forever. It made sure that every person, guilty or innocent, knows their rights before even a single question is asked. And that's something every American citizen ought to know. But it's also a reminder that justice isn't only about finding the truth, it's about how we find it and how we treat the guilty and how we treat the innocent as well. And that's important. As for me, I really don't know if I could have done anything different or anything better back in 1963. You know, people always ask me that. And my reply has been the same for 4 decades. I believe I did the best I could with what I had at the time.